Hello, welcome to my presentation on the biomechanics of a tennis serve. My name is Tyler Hunter, and I'm speaking from the A.T. Still University. What we're going to talk about today is we're going to talk about tennis serve and basically how complex of a movement it is. We're going to talk about the forces that are involved and how in this activity the forces work from the ground up, and basically how the body works as a machine to create this kind of activity. We're going to break the serve down into a 3-phase, 8-stage model. So we're going to talk about all of the related biomechanical factors. We're going to talk about all the potential injuries that come along with it. And we're also going to talk about exercises to help increase serve efficiency while decreasing the risk of injury. Now this is Matt, who was a tennis pro at the facility that I manage. He's our tennis instructor. And so as you can see here, he's doing a regular tennis serve. It's a slow motion capture. We're going to basically break that down into 8 different stages, and then we're going to come back to that and kind of review it again. As I said, we're going to break it down into a 3-phase, 8-stage model. The 3 phases we have here are the prep phase, the acceleration phase, and the follow-through. Each of those are broken down into subcategories. Now, we're going to start with stage 1. The purpose of stage 1 is very simple. We're going to align the body to utilize the ground, basically to create power and force generation. There's no impact as far as muscle and joint beyond just standing there and getting ready to start. With the stage 2 of the prep phase, we have the release. As you can see, Matt's releasing the ball with his non-dominant hand. The toss should be somewhere around 100 degrees of arm abduction overhead. That allows the racket to hit the ball on the other side of your shoulder. With stage 3, you can see Matt has a partial foot up serving technique. Here the body's loading up in order to generate potential energy. The serve efficiency is related to internal rotation of the arm and basically maximizing the leg motion. You can see how he has a lateral tilt of his pelvis, which is very key to generate power with this hit. These movements transfer angular momentum from the lower limbs all the way up to the upper body. As I mentioned, the body works as one giant machine throughout this serve. As we move on to stage 4, we have the cocking of the racket. And so this is very dependent on a productive loading phase. So if you do not load properly, this is going to look very sloppy. Basically, Matt here is increasing the range of motion with his shoulder. As you can see, the racket's back behind his back. The torso lengthens, and the trajectory of the racket to the ball lengthens. So basically, this creates greater potential energy, but it does require optimal range of motion, positioning, and stabilization throughout the shoulder. The leg drive is almost complete in this stage. As we move on to stage 5, we have the acceleration of the racket. So basically, he's just moving that racket as fast as he can towards that ball. You have rapid lumbar spine rotation. Beyond that, we have a torque that is applied to the spinal segments, or more of like a corkscrew movement. Now, the power production during the acceleration stage depends on 2 big factors, and that's strength and neuromuscular coordination. Again, the body has to work as one giant segment. Each muscle, each joint working together and creating one fluid motion. As we move on to stage 6, you have the contact of the ball. Now in the picture you can't clearly see that, but at the ball contact, the ball velocity is determined by shoulder internal rotation and wrist flexion. The greater maximal left lateral flexion angle indicates greater height during a tennis serve and greater left rectus abdominis activity. Now, this is the stage where the whole Magnus effect really comes alive. So the Magnus effect deals with the spin of the ball. So that really relies on the angle of the contact, the velocity of the racket, the axis of the rotation of the ball. And basically that's going to determine the impact of the Magnus effect and how much there really is. Moving on to stage 7, we have the follow-through phase. Now the follow-through phase with the deceleration is actually probably the most high risk for injury. And that's just because, and we're going to touch on this in a minute, but that's basically because if the muscles are not fully developed, especially if there's a muscle imbalance, the person could really, really risk either subluxing a certain joint, especially the shoulder, impingement, or straining one of those muscles, because those muscles have to decelerate a very high velocity of that arm and racket. So basically, continued glenohumeral internal rotation and forearm pronation occur during this stage. The name for that has been termed the long axis rotation. Moving on to stage 8, we have the finish. You can see here as Matt is basically just finishing up his follow-through. It's generating, as I said, a lot of eccentric forces. And something that's really interesting is that research has shown that there are very few significant differences in the kinematics of the serve between professional male and female players, which basically means there's no need to teach different mechanics to each sex. So you can teach the same kind of mechanics for the serve and still have similar results between both genders. Now again, as we go through this, we're going to see Matt releases the ball, he loads his body, he accelerates racket forward, he makes solid contact, and as he's following through, his body's decelerating, and he finishes the serve. Now, there are a lot of potential injuries when it comes to playing tennis, and especially this kind of power serve. So starting with stage 2, you have the release. So where you toss that ball can make all the difference. So if you toss that ball too close to the head, or basically straight above your head, you can drastically increase your arm abduction and cause some sort of impingement in the shoulder. With stage 3, with the loading phase, the spine moves into hyperextension and ipsilateral lateral flexion and ipsilateral rotation. Now this loads the spinal facets and is definitely a high risk for spondylolisthesis and other potential back injuries with the spine. Now, with the cocking phase, when you're bringing the racket behind the head, the shoulder loads in the abducted, externally rotated position, and that can absolutely lead to impingement as well. Beyond that, premature dropping of the tossing arm, coupled with early hip and trunk forward rotation, can lead to an exaggerated horizontal abduction, subjecting the shoulder to basically impingement in the posterior realm and loading of the anterior capsular structures. So basically, a lot of it is putting the shoulder at risk. So if you're not throwing the ball right and you're not bringing that racket back to the right point and right angle properly, you can really, really risk impingement of the shoulder. Moving along with more injuries, as you get into the acceleration phase when you're bringing that racket forward, it puts a lot of stress on the lumbar spine, especially when you serve over and over and over again with some of these elite players because of the repetitive trunk hyperextensions. So it really puts another risk with spinal injuries. As we move into the contact of the ball, you constantly have pretty high and significant asymmetric loads on the lumbar spine because of that lateral flexion and the pelvic rotation. So that's another thing to be very, very conscious of. Beyond that, and as I mentioned before, you have the deceleration. So if your muscles are not developed, especially posteriorly, especially with a rotator cuff, you could really run a serious risk of tearing one of those muscles trying to slow that down. So it's basically like having really worn out brake pads in your car and trying to stop at a high speed. You're just going to wear those muscles out really quick. Now, in order to increase the efficiency as well as decrease the risk of injury, there are a lot of different strength and conditioning exercises to do. Probably number one, and I think this is very almost redundant in a lot of sports and activities, is core strength. We need to target the core strength, bilateral trunk rotation strength and conditioning, as well as the extensor muscles. They all come into play, and without that strong core, the body's really going to put itself at risk for other injuries. And the other big thing besides the core is shoulder stability. You need to have strong rotator cuffs anteriorly and posteriorly in order to not only stabilize that shoulder joint, the glenohumeral, but help accelerate and decelerate properly without overworking one group of muscles. Beyond that, Scapular stability is very, very important because it needs to, that comes into play with the glenohumeral joint. So doing a lot of unilateral and bilateral back rows, lat pull downs, pull ups, etc., helps stabilize that posterior chain. Beyond that, we have the overall strength with just general squats, lunges, wood choppers on cables. You can get more and more specific, gearing towards the tennis movements, but a lot of that overall strength really, really helps as well. And after that, you have the power and speed and even agility. So box jumps on 2 legs, single legs, medicine ball throws into the wall, sprint workouts, you have ladder drills. I mean, the list goes on and on, but the benefits are very noteworthy and very important to always keep in mind when trying to not only become a more efficient tennis player, but decrease the risk of injury. So as I said, the tennis serve is definitely the most complex movement in the game of tennis. So breaking it down like this is very important in order to not only critique somebody's form to make them more efficient, but to decrease the risk of injury. Because the body works like I said, the body works as a machine. Everything comes in together, everything plays in with one another as far as muscles, joints, and it basically just starts from the ground up and works together. We broke it down into 3 phases with the 8-stage model. So looking at the related biomechanical factors through each one of those can drastically help an athlete, especially from our standpoint as a health practitioner. Being aware of the potential injuries, I think, is more than crucial, because you need to know what things to look for if something starts to go wrong or if something looks off. You need to understand what could be going wrong with repetitive motion, because an acute movement might not create an injury, but chronically speaking, if you do something hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times, it might end up leading to an actual issue. And so after that, we also need to keep in mind the different exercises and make sure that we're aware and continually learning what exercises can we do to help make these people better tennis players, as well as decrease the risk of injury altogether, or at least as much as possible. If you're interested, here are the 3 references that I used for this presentation. The main one that I looked at that really helped with that 3-stage, 8-phase model was the Kovacs and Ellenbecker. So I'd encourage you to check that out when you get a chance. And I appreciate you listening. Thank you very much.